Hey, y'all, Gary Humble with Tennessee Stands. Hey, it's been a while, but we're starting to get back into the swing of things now that legislative session is coming up on us on January 9th is when that will officially begin. But just this week, the governor announced his big legislative initiative for 2024, something he calls education freedom. So before we get all excited about the word freedom, because this is what we do, right? It's the same thing this past year whenever we got toll roads, but the governor doesn't call them toll roads. We call them choice lanes here in Tennessee. See, so we're not talking about school vouchers or school choice or any of the other contentious things that maybe have been discussed in the past. No, now we're discussing education freedom, and it sounds great. Look, I agree with almost everyone else, right? Our public schools are failing our children. At best, it would benefit the child if parents had more choice in how their kids are educated. Additionally, no one should have more control over how their child is educated than the parents. So I believe and support all of those things emphatically. And I'm very interested, as are many, in holding public schools accountable and punishing public schools for failing. Let's stop funding failing public schools. All right, so those are some of the reasons that I would support school choice. I would support something like school choice, something like education freedom, because we want to hold failing school systems accountable, and we want to provide better options for our students here in Tennessee. Okay, we're on the same page. But what I want to do right now, okay, is I want to give you a lay of the land of what we're discussing in terms of what the governor calls an education savings account. And we're going to take a look at, here in Tennessee, an education savings account and education scholarships, right? We call them scholarships now, not vouchers, by the way. We call them scholarships, and that's an important distinction. But let's take a look at how the ESA bill started in Tennessee. Let me change my screen here. So this started back in 2019 when Bill Lee first took office. One of the very first things he worked with the legislature to do was to pass Tennessee's first iteration of its ESA program. The problem is that the program got wrapped up in court because as Bill Lee lobbied the legislature for support, a lot of legislators didn't want it. Nobody wanted it. Knox County didn't want it. This county didn't want it. Eventually, in order to get something passed, they had to amend the bill simply to make ESAs available only in 2 counties, 2 of 95 counties. So that's what we've had so far since 2019 is an education savings account program that has been available to students, low-income students, by the way, in Davidson counties and Shelby counties, so Nashville and Memphis. Well, that got taken to court and was ruled unconstitutional by the lower courts and ruled unconstitutional by the Tennessee Court of Appeals. So all the way up to the appellate court, the court deemed that a law that did not equally impact all 95 counties made by the legislature was unconstitutional. By the way, I wholeheartedly agree. Our Constitution requires any action of the legislature that has an impact on one county to equally have that same impact on all 95 counties. But that's not what they did in 2019. They passed a law that only impacted 2 counties. Why? Because at the time, much of the legislature was against the governor's school choice plan. So what I'm showing you right here is shortly thereafter, as the ESA program got wrapped up in court, there was a death on the Supreme Court. And Governor Bill Lee had an option to appoint a new member to the Tennessee Supreme Court. Remember, this is all while the ESA bill is being adjudicated through the court system as to whether or not its constitutionality. Also worth noting, this is Bill Lee's key piece of legislation. This school choice for Bill Lee is his legacy as a governor. So it's very, very important to him. So he needed this to get past the Supreme Court. Well, I want to show you at the time in 2021, there were eventually 3 nominees that were brought to the governor's office: Sarah Campbell, Christy Davis, and William Neal McBrayer. Now, here's what I want to show you, all right? Because it's just, again, showing you the history of the ESA bill, which, by the way, there's still ongoing federal investigations surrounding then Speaker of the House Glenn Cassida and all of these quid pro quos that were being made in order to get the ESA bill passed. So still ongoing federal prosecutions, and if you recall, there were a bunch of FBI raids on several members of the General Assembly. That all had to do surrounding with the governor's quid pro quo offers being made to get this ESA bill passed in the first. So there's a lot here, right? But in terms of the Supreme Court, the governor had an option of either appointing current members of the appellate court, Christy Davis and William McBrayer. Remember, the same appellate court that had held the governor's ESA bill unconstitutional, or Sarah Campbell, who was part of the Attorney General's office, who is defending the constitutionality of the ESA bill. All right, so one candidate for the Supreme Court pro-ESA bill, 2 possible contenders for the Supreme Court potentially against the ESA bill because the same appellate court held it unconstitutional. So what happens? Well, on January 12th, 2022, the governor appoints Sarah Campbell, the apparently pro-ESA candidate for the court, because she worked for the same Attorney General's office that was defending the bill. But what happens subsequently on May 18th, 2022, after she's appointed? Magically, the Tennessee Supreme Court now rules by a 3-2 verdict, 1 swing vote. So right after the governor makes his Supreme Court appointment, or I should say 5 months after, the same Supreme Court now by a vote of 3-2 rules the ESA bill that was previously unconstitutional constitutional. All right, so that's the beginning of education freedom here in the state of Tennessee. That's how this all started. Now, here's some facts. I want to talk about illegal immigration, and I want to talk about funding. That's the 2 things that I want to bring up today while we're talking about this ESA bill, this education freedom movement here in Tennessee. We have this unfortunate little court ruling from 1982 called Plyer versus Doe. What did Plyer versus Doe do? Well, it denies, or actually, let me restate this. Plyer versus Doe in the Supreme Court held that these are things that schools cannot do. So public schools now cannot deny a student enrollment based on undocumented status. In other words, our public schools, I don't know if you knew this, our public schools here in Tennessee are required, our taxpayer dollars are required to fund education for illegal immigrants here in the state of Tennessee because of this court ruling. Schools cannot require different procedures to determine a student's residency. Schools cannot engage in any activities that may discourage a student from enrolling. It cannot require students or their parents to document their immigration status. Schools cannot ask questions that might expose a student's immigration status. And schools cannot require a student's Social Security number for enrollment purposes. So this is concerning. I don't know if many realized right now that the federal government requires states, which is crazy. I believe that to be unconstitutional. But there have been bills submitted in the General Assembly in an effort to block funding for illegal immigrants, because we're trying to do everything we can to curb illegal immigration here in Tennessee. Unfortunately, those measures have failed because current federal law, per this Supreme Court ruling, requires the state to fund education for illegal immigrants. So there's a question that's come up. Since Plyer versus Doe requires states currently to fund public education for illegal immigration, how can states have school choice that create vouchers that allow parents to send their children to private school with public money? How is that not being made available under Plyer versus Doe to the same illegal immigrants? How can we force illegal immigrants, per these federal regulations, to go to a public school, but not have access to this same public money to go into private school? Well, I've got an answer. We can't keep that from happening. So let me bring my screen back up here. This is an article in Chalkbeat just from last year in 2022. And I want to bring up this little statement from the article. A Tennessee school voucher program passed in 2019 excluded undocumented students from participating. So apparently, the bill that was passed in 2019 worked to attempt to keep these funds from being available to illegal immigrants. However, this was already prompting talk of a legal challenge. So the state already knows that in trying to keep illegals from having access to this money for private education that we're talking about passing now, that we're going to get sued, and it's going to go to court. So the question is, what's the precedent that's been set so far? All right. So now I want to take you to a Daily Caller article from August 2018, and I want you to look at this because remember, Arizona passed school choice in 2018. So we have something to look at, which, by the way, that Arizona school choice package has been a model not only for what's recently passed in Arkansas, which Governor Sarah Sanders came to promote here in Tennessee along with the governor, but it's also serving now as a model for what we're looking at doing here in Tennessee. So what happened in 2018 whenever they passed their school choice bill? It was found that the Arizona Federation for Children, a project of the American Federation for Children, by the way, one of the same national organizations pushing school choice here in Tennessee, gave a pitch in Spanish urging parents to check if their children's qualified for state funds, according to the Arizona Republic on Monday. Arizona has a state-funded program that pays for private schools for thousands of children who live in this state, the pitch said in Spanish. They don't verify income or immigration status. Children don't need to have or maintain certain grades. These funds cover tuition fees for private schools, tutors, uniforms, and more. All right, so let me make sure you understand what's going on here. When Arizona in 2018 passed their school choice bill, national organizations like the American Federation for Children were running advertisements in Spanish to residents of Arizona, notifying Spanish-speaking individuals that their immigration status was of no consequence when applying for these funds that would allow their children to attend private schools on the taxpayer dime. All right, let me dumb that down for you if you didn't catch that. Conservative organizations, so-called conservative organizations that are pushing school choice, were advertising to illegal immigrants in Arizona in Spanish that their children could qualify for taxpayer funds to send their kids to private school. Let me move on. There was an article in the Arizona Central, which is their counterpart owned by Gannett, USA Today, to the Tennessean, all right, reported that the same issue of this ESA was going to fund illegal immigration. So they interviewed State Senator John Kavanaugh in Arizona. And unless you think this is some nondescript guy that doesn't know what the hell he's talking about, Arizona State Senator John Kavanaugh is also the chairman of their Appropriations Committee. So this guy knows where all the money's going. All right. Senator John Kavanaugh said he opposes marketing ESAs to people who are in the country illegally. Quote, "We passed ESA to promote good education, not illegal immigration," Kavanaugh said. "I strongly object to someone to try to divert public funding to people who are here illegally." But the story goes on. Continue reading. Kavanaugh acknowledged that undocumented immigrants can legally use ESAs because federal law forbids the state from asking about a student's immigration status. But he said their participation should not be encouraged. And listen to this quote. Quote, "The most we can do is not encourage it," Kavanaugh said. All right. Let Let me pause, and I'm going to come back to something else in just a minute. So I want to be clear, because as I'm putting this video out, of course, Gary hates the children. Of course, Gary's not a conservative. Gary doesn't know what he's talking about. This isn't going to fund illegal immigration. But what I'm telling you is the same bill, let me say that one more time. The same bill, education savings account. They actually call it education freedom also in Arizona. The same bill that passed in Arizona in 2018 is funding private education on the taxpayer dime for illegal immigrants, and they knew it. And per the chairman of the Appropriations Committee, on record states the best they can do is just not advertise it. All right, so I want you to understand right out of the gate, okay, this education freedom initiative that the governor is pushing by federal requirements, okay, even if we get taken to court, is going to fund private education for illegal immigration. All right. Now, the next thing I want to take you to is this idea of who is funding these initiatives that are pushing school choice, because you and I are being told that school choice is supposed to be a conservative move. We're giving freedom to parents. You know, we're defunding the public school system, which we're not. That's not the way this is working at all. And we're moving to private education. But these are happening with tax dollars. And before I dig into the money, and bear with me here, because the money part, this is where it really gets fun. You know, I know I'm 17 minutes in. Everybody complains. Gary makes long videos. I don't know what else to do, y'all, because I don't know how else to show you all of the craziness that's going on. And we're trying to combat a massive narrative that's being pushed against you that school choice is the best thing ever and it's going to fix everything. But what I'm telling you is it's going to fund illegals. Here's what else it's going to do. It's going to introduce more government regulation into the private sector. All right, so do you think, let me ask you a question. When public money begins to flow into private schools and homeschools, by the way, the governor's Education Freedom Program on its website already states that these funds will be available to Category 4 church-related homeschools, which over 94%, I don't know why I said 94%, which over 90% of homeschoolers in Tennessee are categorized as. I mean, almost every homeschooler in Tennessee is categorized as a church-related homeschool. All right, so as those funds, as taxpayer funds, enter into private schools and homeschools, do you think that regulations are never going to follow that money? Even if they don't today, can you honestly say that when we continue to, if we begin to put taxpayer funds into the private sector and into our homes, that at some point in the probably very near future, that the government is not going to be interested in having more say over the kind of curriculum that we're using in our homeschools and our private schools? It's not going to have more say over how our students are being educated in private schools and homeschools? Seriously? Is that really an argument that you're willing to buy? Your argument is going to be that the state is going to just give you free money. They're going to give you $7,000 a year to send your kids to private school and homeschools, and that's just going to go forth and prosper, and no one's going to care about regulating now your private activities that you're using those public funds for. If you honestly believe that, you need to go do some digging, some soul searching, because let me tell you right now, I believe with 100% certainty that now or later, may take 2 years, might take 5 years, government regulations, whether they be required by the federal government or pushed through the state as a proxy, government regulation will enter that private space to a degree that you will not be willing to accept. All right? I want to move on to the money because I'm running out of time. Who funds these efforts, and how are these efforts funded? All right, I want to show you right now an organization called 50 Can. Let me show you this text real quick. All right, take a look at this text. This is a text currently being sent out around Tennessee, encouraging Tennesseans to click on their action link and support education freedom here in the state of Tennessee. Governor Bill Lee just announced a plan to expand school choice here in Tennessee. Click the link below to contact your legislator and voice support for parental rights. This is all about parental rights. Well, this organization is called Tennessee Can. Well, who's Tennessee Can? Tennessee Can is a state chapter, and you can see it right down here, Tennessee Can. It's a state chapter of a national organization called 50 Can. All right, and they have state chapters in multiple states, red states, blue states, all across the country. But I want to just show you a little bit about some of the other things that organizations like 50 Can advocate for. These aren't conservative people. Okay, and that's the message I want to get across to you. The organizations pushing school choice and education freedom in Tennessee right now through Governor Bill Lee's plans, all right, that you're being, this bill of goods you're being sold, are not being funded by conservative people. The same organization in Connecticut, listen to this. Listen to what they do in Connecticut. In Tennessee, they push for school choice. In Connecticut, they continue to fight for student-centered funding and diversifying the educator workforce so that students have access to teachers who share their background. So in Tennessee, they push for school choice. In Connecticut, they push for racial equity in the schools because, clearly a brown kid needs a brown teacher. Like, that's the message, right? This, again, 50. So who's 50 Can? So let's dig into this a little bit. All right. One of the organizations that's pushing, so 50 Can, the 501c4 from Washington, D.C., is not the only avenue by which they're using their money to push texting here in the state of Tennessee to support education freedom. They're also using PACs like Tennesseans for Putting Students First. All right, so I want to show you who Tennesseans for Putting Students First is and where their money comes from. But first, let me show you this real quick. Who's Tennesseans for Putting Students First? All right, do you guys remember last year when I ran for state senate here in Williamson County? There were two mailers like this that were put out. Comparing me, Gary Humble, to Nancy Pelosi. All right, so the message was the two most radical, the two most dangerous politicians for Tennessee. Don't vote for Nancy Pelosi and Gary Humble. Why? Well, Gary Humble's anti-business and he's an anti-capitalist. That the message going around when I ran for state senate is that I was anti-business because I had written some articles against the state giving our tax dollars to the Ford Corporation and to the Tennessee Titans to build stadiums and factories for electric vehicles with our tax dollars. All right, so I'm against the government giving tax money to subsidize private interests. I don't think that's the way things should work. But because of that, I'm anti-business and anti-capitalist, and I'm just like Nancy Pelosi. This mailer, why am I showing you this Gary Humble, this beautiful, well-designed Gary Humble Nancy Pelosi mailer? Why am I showing you this? Because it was paid for by Tennesseans for Putting Students First. Now, why does an organization that pushes for school choice care about whether or not I'm anti-business or anti-capitalist? Well, it's because they have an agenda. It's because they're not conservatives. It's because they're leftists. So who funds, where does the Tennesseans for Putting Students First get their money? All right, let's take a look. Wow. Well, I mean, almost exclusively. So here's one report, one of their 2022 reports. $100,000 from who? From the 50 Can Action Fund. That's who funds the same organization that attacked me in my campaign for being anti-business and now pushing school choice across the state of Tennessee. Well, let's look at another report. That was the pre-general. Let's look at their third quarter report. Campaign for Great Public Schools, another $6,000. We'll get to them in a minute. Campaign for Great Public Schools, also known as the city fund. Let's go back. Let's look at their pre-primary report. Holy cow, another $100,000 from the 50 Can Action Fund. All right, let's go back. Let's look at their second quarter. All right, so we're expanding this funding a little bit. 50 Can Action Fund, Campaign for Great Public Schools, and Jim Walton. Does that name Jim Walton ring a bell? Yeah, it's Walmart. Jim Walton is the youngest son of Walmart founder Sam Walton. He's part of the Walmart family, and he's the chairman of the family's bank, Averst Bank, worth more than $20 billion. And you can see right here, Jim Walton Arvest Bank. All right, so this is so the money coming into this Tennesseans for Putting Students First PAC that's attacking me and pushing school choice is funded by leftist national organizations like 50 Can, the Campaign for Great Public Schools, which I'm going to show you some very nefarious money here in a minute, and the Waltons, Walmart, of course, bastions of conservatism. So who is the Campaign for Great Public Schools? Well, it's the City Fund in Washington, D.C. And who funds the City Fund? John Arnold. All right, bear with me here. John and Laura Arnold run a foundation called Arnold Ventures, who spreads their billions of dollars, these are multi-billionaires, across far left organizations across the country, one of which is the Campaign for Great Public Schools. They gave them a $7 million grant in 2021. So who is John and Laura Arnold? You're going to love this. Investors Business Daily calls John and Laura Arnold mini George Soroses. Well, why? Charles and David Koch generally fund limited government groups that support their libertarian worldview. Counter that with George Soros, who funds funds groups that create chaos and promote socialism. To that end, the Arnolds, both through their foundation and their personal giving, are like mini George Soroses. From abortion to anti-Second Amendment work to liberal investigative journalism to single-payer health care, the Arnolds fund the gamut of far-left causes. All right, so let me connect the dots for you. PACs that are pushing school choice here in the state of Tennessee, that are backing the governor's plan for education freedom. C4 organizations like 50 Can that are sending out texts across the state of Tennessee asking you to support the governor's ESA bill, right? That's going to be coming into the legislative session here in 2024. The people that fund these PACs and organizations like 50 Can are the same folks that fund money around organizations like City Fund and Campaign for Great Public Schools, like John and Laura Arnold, who are literally called mini George Soroses because they don't only fund opportunities like school choice, but abortion, anti-Second Amendment legislation, and far-left woke ideologies all across the country. Now, again, I'm going to ask you another question. Why would far-left activists, far-left billionaires, why would the same folks that fund efforts for abortion and anti-Second Amendment legislation and woke agendas be the same people that pump money into conservative efforts like school choice? Here's the deal. No one's seen the bill yet, by the way, that the governor's proposing, right? I can only speak to what's been said publicly in other states and what the governor has so far said publicly about his efforts to promote school choice around the state. Because again, whether you're for it or against it, we've not seen the bill. But what the two questions you need to be asking is, one, you need someone to prove to you, beyond a shadow of a doubt, prove to you how our efforts to promote school choice, how this tax money going into the private sector is not going to fund illegals. So I need someone to prove to me how that's not the case, because it's happening in other states because of Plyer versus Doe. And lastly, I need someone to explain to me, why is the money funding the push for school choice in Tennessee coming from far-left megadonors? How is that possible? Why are the same PACs that are pushing this agenda funded by the left here in Tennessee? Before you go crazy, right, calling your legislators and emailing your legislators and telling them that you support the governor's push for parental choice, you need answers to these really, really important questions. I'm sure that as we get closer to legislative session, there will be much more. But make sure you go to TennesseeStands.org and subscribe to our email list, because it's information like this that we're going to be sending you throughout the legislative session so that you can stay informed and make sure that you're making an educated decision before you just buy the talking point from the next mass text that you get on your phone as to what you should be supporting in terms of conservative values here in Tennessee. Be discerning and be